Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The war in Ukraine has hit a stalemate. It's been like that for a while, but the West seems to be finally coming to terms with it. There is a new American assessment. It says Ukraine will not be able to retake any important city, at least this year, even as Ukraine's pilots start training on the F-16s. Western leaders could be nudging Kyiv towards a compromise because after more than 500 days of fighting, the world is feeling the impact of this frozen conflict. Food prices have shot up exponentially. India is contemplating importing wheat from Russia to tame inflation. In Pakistan, the cricket board is in hot water. It tried to wipe the memory of their only World Cup winning captain, Imran Khan. The move has backfired. China is making deeper inroads in West Asia with new weapon deals. The militaries of West Asia are preparing to make an intervention, West Africa rather, preparing to make an intervention in Niger, and there is new death startup wave. A clutch of companies are now promising services to make funerals easier. We'll tell you all about it. The headlines first. US, Japan and South Korea hold a trilateral summit. It's the first such event hosted by President Biden at Camp David. The focus was on defense, diplomacy and tech. The leaders agreed to operate a hotline and pledged to confer closely in a crisis. US, Japan and South Korea claim the grouping is not aimed at China. Kenya bans churches linked to cult deaths. Authorities have barred 5 churches, including that of a suspected cult leader. Paul Mackenzie is accused of inciting his followers to starve themselves to death. Predominantly Christian Kenya has struggled to regulate churches and cults. A woman who posted rice and poison to Trump gets almost 22 years in jail. The Canadian citizen sent a threatening letter to Donald Trump at the White House in 2020. The letter contained the poison. It was intercepted before it could reach the White House. A giant gargoyle-like statue creates a storm in Thailand's capital. It's a huge black statue of an emaciated winged figure with golden fangs. Its sudden appearance on a busy Bangkok street has triggered alarm. Authorities have launched an investigation after many people called for its removal. And Paris bans pony rides for children. From 2025, kids cannot go on pony rides in the public parks of the French capital. Animal rights activists had objected to these rides, saying the ponies were ill-treated. Our lead tonight is about the war in Ukraine. Kyiv started its counteroffensive in the month of June. The general consensus is that it's not going to plan. There are no major breakthroughs yet. Russia has not toned down its attacks. So what's going wrong? Well, the US has shared an assessment, and remember, this is the biggest Western ally of Ukraine. US intelligence says Ukraine's counteroffensive will fail to meet a key goal. It was supposed to give Kyiv a decisive edge, but that's not happening, not yet. So what's the way forward? More weapons for Kyiv. They will now get American F-16 jets. Meanwhile, Western leaders are also talking about a compromise. Will they force Ukraine to negotiate, and will Russia play ball? Tonight, we'll discuss all of this and more. First, let's tell you about Ukraine's setbacks. What does the American assessment say? The focus is on a city called Melitopol. It is in the southeast and under Russian control. Melitopol was a key priority for Kyiv, a principal objective. Ukrainian forces are outside this city. They're trying to make advances and take control, but America believes that may not happen. Now, why does Kyiv want Melitopol? Because it is strategically significant. The city is called the gateway to Crimea, and Crimea, as you would know, was a part of Ukraine until Russia took it by force in 2014. Now, if Ukraine wants to take Crimea back, it must take Melitopol first. 2 important highways intersect here. It also has an important rail line. Russia moves military personnel and equipment through it. So controlling it won't just give Kyiv territorial advantage, it will give them strategic advantage too. The takeover will hurt the Russian military. It will disrupt their supply lines. But America thinks Ukraine won't be able to do this. They've already used up a lot of resources on this front, both troops and weapons. And now the fear is that they may not have enough to keep going. So they're getting the F-16 jets. Washington has given the green light. Denmark and the Netherlands will supply the planes, but it won't happen in a hurry. They will not be pressed into service immediately. First, Ukrainian pilots must be trained for these jets. The training will happen in Denmark. It should start sometime this month. Now, Kyiv admits that the whole process will take time. So the F-16s won't be seen in action until 2024. What will Kyiv do in the meantime? Keep fighting. That's what Ukraine's foreign minister has said. He agrees that the offensive is going slow, but he also says no matter how long it takes, their priorities have not changed. They want to retake every inch of their land, and they will need more weapons to do that.
But
the truth is that until we have won, we will need more. We need to move forward because war is a reality, and in this reality, we need to win. There is no other way.
Give us more time and more weapons. That is the message from Kyiv, but some in the West are running out of both. Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president of France, has weighed in. He says there should be a referendum in the disputed areas. I have a quote from what he said. The Ukrainians will want to reconquer what has been unjustly taken from them. But if they can't manage it completely, the choice will be between a frozen conflict or taking the high road out with referendum strictly overseen by the international community. This is what Sarkozy is suggesting. Paris and Kyiv were quick to reject this idea, but Sarkozy is finding takers elsewhere. Earlier this week, we told you about a NATO official, the chief of staff of the NATO Secretary General. He too proposed a compromise of a different kind though. He said Ukraine should give up land for NATO membership. Kyiv came down hard on NATO for this. The official had to apologize, but he refused to completely rule out the idea. Then back in the month of May, President Emmanuel Macron of France had spoken on similar lines. He said if Ukraine did not meet its military objectives, Europe should reassess its support. The West may have to negotiate with Putin. That's what Macron said. Now, if you join these dots, you will see where this is heading. Is the West nudging Ukraine towards a compromise of some sort? Because on the ground, the risks increasingly outweigh the gains. Today, a statement came from Alexander Lukashenko. He's the president of Belarus, also a key ally of Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko said he's ready to use nuclear weapons if needed. Remember, Lukashenko is hosting Russian troops and Wagner fighters in his country. He's allowed Russian troops to attack Ukraine from Belarus. In the month of June, he also took the delivery of Russian nukes. And now he's issued a warning to the West. He said if there is quote-unquote foreign aggression, Belarus will respond, and I'm quoting again, respond with everything they have. And that includes the Russian nukes. So as things stand, the conflict is frozen. Ukraine is not making the gains it should have made given the material and military investment that it has received from the West. Nuclear threats continue to be made, and the West is toying with the idea of a negotiated settlement. Ukraine is rejecting the idea for now, but it doesn't really have much elbow room. Now, the war is in Ukraine, but the whole world is feeling the impact, especially at the dinner table. Food prices are rising once again. Even major food producers are considering drastic options, like India. Reports say New Delhi is thinking about importing wheat. And this is very significant. India has been self-sufficient in food grains, meaning we produce enough for our consumption and then some. We never had to import. But now the government is spooked. Wheat prices have gone up by almost 10% in the last 2 months in India. Inflation is at a 15-month high. So what is the solution? Maybe imports. Reports say the plan is to buy discounted wheat from Russia. And just to be clear, there is no shortage in India yet. We are not running out of wheat, so do not rush to your grocery shop. The idea of this import is to bring down prices. It's called a supply-side measure. If you increase the supply, the prices will come down. That is the idea. These reports first emerged in the first week of August. They said two things. One, that India should slash or abolish import duty on wheat. Right now, the duty is 40%. The report said it could be reduced or removed. That was one point. The second was this, that India could import wheat. Not private traders, but the government would import wheat. The centre had dismissed this report. from the first week of August. They said there was no such proposal in the pipeline. But weeks later, the reports have re-emerged, and this time with more details. We will focus on three aspects of it. Number one, how much are we buying and at what rates? Number two, how will we pay for it? And number three, how significant is this? The proposal is to buy around 8 to 9 million tons of wheat. Technically, we don't need that much to stabilize prices. We need around 3 to 4 million tons to do that. But the government reportedly wants a deep price cut, something that is noticeable. Now to discounts. Traders say around $25 to $40 per ton is possible. Now that discount is important. The imported wheat must be cheaper than the local wheat, or at least at the same price. If not, you will end up driving prices up further. How will India pay for these shipments? With dollars. You see, food is exempt from Western sanctions. You can buy grains, cooking oils and fertilizers without any blowback. India, in fact, already buys sunflower oil from Russia. We pay for it in dollars. So officials say the same strategy will be used for wheat. Now, full disclosure, the government has not officially confirmed any of this. It is based on information reportedly given by Indian government sources. Having said that, this conversation is not new. It began right after Russia invaded Ukraine. Both countries made up around 25% of global wheat supply, Russia and Ukraine, 25% of the global supply. So when the war began, prices shot up across the world. India responded by banning wheat exports. That was strike one. Strike two was the weather. India's wheat output is around 10% less than what was projected. As a result, our stocks are down. India has around 28 million tons of wheat in government warehouses. It may sound like a lot, but it's 20% less than the 10-year average. So prices are up and stocks are down. It tells you why India is considering wheat imports. Now to the final question. How significant is this? In one word, very. India rarely imports wheat from other countries. Private traders import some of the fancy varieties, but the government does not. The last big purchase was in the year 2017. India's private traders bought around 5 million tons of wheat. But this deal with Russia is very different from that. It's not just private traders, it's also the government, and chances are there will be backlash. You see, food security is a political issue in India, and there is some bad history here. In the 1950s and 60s, India was not self-sufficient. We had to import food from outside. I'll tell you an anecdote from 1965. India was at war with Pakistan. Then Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri went on All India Radio. He asked every Indian to sacrifice 1 meal per week. Why? Because that's how the food situation was. We've come a long way since then. Thanks to the Green Revolution, India has become self-sufficient. We could feed ourselves. And in the last couple of years, we expanded on that dream. India talked about feeding the rest of the world too, but from the looks of it, we haven't reached that stage yet, at least not yet. Dozens of countries do import food grains every year, so it's not unheard of, but the difference is our population. India has close to 1.4 billion people, so food security is also a strategic concern for us. In this changing geopolitical world, you can't depend on anyone for food, not even partners like Russia. And speaking of unreliable partners, Pakistan's cricket board is one of them. On the 14th of August, they posted a video on social media. It was a tribute to Pakistani cricket, the great players, the great moments, all of it. But guess who was missing from that video? Imran Khan. If you follow cricket, you know why this is controversial. Pakistan has won just one ODI World Cup, only once in their history. Back in 1992 in Australia, Imran Khan captained the side. He top scored in the final. He picked up 1 wicket. It's the greatest moment in Pakistan's cricketing history ever. Every Pakistani has seen these pictures. Imran Khan carrying the trophy above his shoulders, but none of that made it to the clip. Imagine the BCCI making a video on Indian cricket with no Kapil Dev and MS Dhoni in it. Can you imagine the backlash? That's exactly what happened in Pakistan too. Some of his teammates led the way, like Wasim Akram. This is what he posted on social media. Political differences apart, Imran Khan is an icon of world cricket and developed Pakistan into a strong unit. PCB should delete the video and apologize. This is what Wasim Akram said. I must say this, Imran Khan's cricketing friends are better than his political friends. At least they're not jumping ship. As for the cricket board, they did listen to Wasim Akram. They posted an updated video. This one did feature Imran Khan, but guess what? Wasim Akram was dropped. It's equal parts funny and tragic. In the end, the PCB got their act right. Their third video featured both Imran Khan and Wasim Akram. But instead of an apology, they gave an excuse, a laughable excuse. I'll quote from what they've said. Due to its length, the old video was abridged and some important clips were missing. This has been rectified in the complete version of the video. How about that? As if none of us have ever used Twitter. It's clear why Imran Khan was missing from the video, the first video, because the establishment is after him. Not editing glitches, not duration issues, just plain old politics. Now, we don't know who made this decision. Did the army ask the cricket board to remove Imran Khan, or was it a voluntary call? Either way, it sums up politics in Pakistan. Once the army abandons you, nothing matters. You may have won a World Cup. You may have been Prime Minister. You may even have walked on the moon. None of it will save you. It's the worst kind of politics. Imran Khan has already been jailed on corruption charges. He's been sentenced to 3 years in prison. His political party has been destroyed from the inside. Dozens of his top leaders have defected. For most people, that would be enough, but not in Pakistan. The army has almost nullified Imran Khan, the politician. Now it wants to erase Imran Khan, the cricketer. This time, the fans stood up for him. But will the voters do the same? That is the big question. Pakistan's elections were supposed to be held by November this year, but that's not happening anymore. The dates have been pushed back. Their election commissioner says the constituencies have to be redrawn. There's a new census. So they will redraw constituencies. How long will that take? At least 4 months. The poll body is hoping that the process will be done by the 14th of December. Only then will elections be announced. And the army will be hoping to tie up all the loose ends by then, the loose ends being Imran Khan. Imagine the votes are counted and Imran Khan's party wins. It would embarrass the Pakistan army. So they have 2 options left. One is to rig the voting on a massive scale, or 2, wait out the storm. Keep breaking up Imran Khan's party and cadre. The first option has a downside, the rigging. You see, Western countries sent poll monitors to Pakistan. They've been doing so since 2008. So widespread rigging could backfire. Is that why the army is playing the long game? Well, it's certainly possible. This is all uncharted territory for them. Usually when the army deposes leaders, they disappear. That's what happened in 2018. In the elections in 2018, Nawaz Sharif was disqualified, so Imran Khan's victory was guaranteed. But this time, there is no such guarantee. Imran Khan's appeal is still pending at the higher courts. Plus, his support base could go either way. He is a popular leader. As the PCB episode showed, Imran Khan, the cricketer, still has support. Twitter was flooded with criticism of the Pakistan Cricket Board, but will it be enough for him to pull off another 1992? Well, that final in Melbourne was a fair game. This one against the army will not be. And now let's talk about some geopolitical games. China wants a foothold in West Asia, and it has found a new way to win friends and influence the region. That new way is defense deals. China has been quietly making inroads. In the last decade, Chinese arms to West Asia, arms sales, have jumped by 80%, 80. America has taken note. It is the biggest supplier of weapons to this region, and it seems to be feeling threatened. So Washington is making overtures. US officials have spoken to their counterparts in West Asia, and they have a simple message for them. Do not buy Chinese weapons. Why? Because they will not work with American hardware. You won't be able to integrate them. So it's better to stick with made in America. That's their argument. But you see, these are technicalities. They often do not influence political decisions, and arms deals at the end of the day are political. Also, Chinese weapons have another draw. Lower cost and better deals. Beijing is offering better deals and no lectures on human rights. It certainly helps. The US realizes this. Earlier this year, an American general spoke to lawmakers in his country. His name is General Michael Kurilla. He heads the US Central Command. In his testimony, he described how China's approach is different. Let me read out a quote from what he said. They open up their entire catalog. They give them express shipping. They give them no end user agreement. And they give them financing. Basically, there are no strings attached when you do deals with China. That's what the general is trying to say. For decades, Gulf states have been major buyers of American weapons, but now they're drawn towards Chinese gear because the process is easier. They don't need to convince Washington. They don't have to wait for approvals from the US Congress. They don't have to suffer lectures on human rights while also paying big money. They can deploy Chinese weapons wherever they like. They can use them however they want to. No preconditions, no rules to follow, plus the delivery is quick and the financing is flexible. So it's no wonder that China is winning more deals. They got their first opening in the 2010s. Saudi Arabia and the UAE wanted armed drones. America was reluctant to give them, so China swooped in. They sold the drones to these West Asian powers. It was their USP. Light and low-cost combat weapons systems. That's what China sold. From 2010 to 2018, China sold weapons worth $760 million to the region, to West Asia. $760 million. How does that stack up against other players? In the same time period, 2010 to 2018, Russia sold weapons worth $8.6 billion. That's 11 times more than China. What about the US? $35.2 billion worth of exports, 46 times as much as China. So the US is miles ahead of others. And going by these numbers, they have no reason to be worried. And yet they are, because China is expanding its footprint. They got their foot in the door with low-end weapons, and now they have a solid foundation in the region. They're going after the bigger deals. Look at this report from the month of May. China was negotiating with Saudi Arabia and Egypt. What do they want to buy? More sophisticated weapons like air defense systems, fighter jets, suicide drones. That's the kind of stuff America would hesitate in sharing with West Asian powers, but China has no such limitations. The value of their deals is going up. Look at Saudi Arabia, for example. They bought a lot of weapons from China last year. The Chinese media reported about it. They said Riyadh is buying armed drones, hypersonic anti-ship missiles, and counter-drone platforms. What was the value of this deal? $4 billion. That's much more than the $1 million deals that China closed 5 years ago. But again, these are claims from Chinese mouthpieces, so take them with a pinch of salt. Having said that, there is no question about the appeal of Chinese weapons in West Asia. Beijing is not just selling arms, it is also offering collaboration. In the month of March this year, Riyadh and Beijing signed an agreement, a joint venture to make UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. China's third largest state-run firm was involved. They'll help make UAVs in Saudi Arabia. And the US is worried about all of this, about interoperability, for instance. But if the present trend continues, they won't have much of a choice. West Asia is taking to Chinese arms, and while the Americans are far ahead right now, Beijing is catching up fast. And now let's move from questionable to revolutionary technology. A war has been brewing in Italy for decades, and now the Italians have got a new high-tech weapon to turn the tide. Before we continue, I should mention here the war is over cheese. Specifically, Parmesan cheese from the mountains of Italy. That's the only kind that can officially be called Parmesan in Europe. It has a protected designation of origin. But all over the world, there are cheese counterfeits. They're looking to get a slice of that Parmesan profit. So the Italians have introduced a novel way to ensure authenticity: microchips. They're attaching edible microchips to their wheels of cheese. So your next plate of pasta could have a silicone surprise. Here's a report.
What would you do to protect your brand? How far would you go to preserve your trademark? Would you be willing to feed your customers computer chips? Because that's exactly what cheesemakers from Italy are doing. They're embedding microchips in their famous Parmesan cheese. Centuries ago, high in Italy's Apennine Mountains, a group of monks made a discovery. They found a way to preserve cheese over long periods and have it taste great the whole time. They had created Italy's famed Parmesan cheese. It's known as Parmigiano Reggiano in Italian. It's named for the two provinces where it's made, Parma and Reggio Emilia. And these are the only places where Parmesan cheese can officially come from. Because it's been given a protected designation of origin, this is a marker of authenticity. It's known by many names across the world, but its function is the same everywhere. Certifying a region as the true home of a product, marking the original birthplace of a beloved and respected good. You know how to qualify as champagne a sparkling wine needs to come from the Champagne region of France? In the same way, to really be Parmesan, cheese needs to come from Parma and Reggio Emilia. Cheese from anywhere else cannot be called Parmesan, not in the EU anyway. Italian Parmesan producers got the protected designation of origin in 1996. They fought hard for it because it's not easy to make Parmesan. One wheel of the cheese is usually made from 550 litres of milk. They end up weighing about 40 kilograms each. Then they have to be matured for at least 12 months. That too in the mountainous air of Parma or Reggio Emilia. After all that, the cheese has to pass an inspection. Experts test it 2 years after production. They have to make sure the cheese meets quality standards. As you can see, it takes a lot of work for cheese to become Parmesan. So just imagine someone not doing all this and still taking the credit. It would be infuriating for the Italian cheese crafters, and they would do anything to ensure authenticity. Not to mention, they would hate to share the profits from their craft. Believe it or not, the Parmesan business is quite lucrative. Last year, sales were worth about $3.15 billion. It was a record high. But the counterfeit Parmesan market has been growing too. Italy's authentic Parmesan producers have an association. It's called the Parmigiano Reggiano Consortium. They estimate that counterfeit Parmesan sales touched $2 billion globally last year. That means about 40% of all Parmesan sold last year was fake. It's a huge loss for the Italian cheese crafters, but it's also an age-old problem. The cheesemakers from Italy have been trying to fight counterfeit cheese for over a century. The forgeries have been on the rise since after World War I. Over the years, the Parmesan Cheese Association has been upping its game, using modern technology to fight the counterfeit cheese. And now they have their latest tool, edible microchips. The microchips are technically normal. They're edible because they're small as a grain of salt. So even if you eat them, you'll be fine. But if you're still worried, don't fret. The microchips aren't placed randomly on Parmesan cheese wheels. They're embedded in a QR code on the cheese skin. A wheel of cheese has a hard skin made of the protein casein. Most people don't eat it. So don't worry, the microchip won't go into your pizza without you knowing. Each chip carries a unique digital ID. Blockchain technology is reportedly used to ensure no duplicates are possible, and the ID tells you everything about the cheese, from when it was made and where, to even the dairy farm where the milk for the cheese came from. It's a thorough digital ID, accessible with a laser chip reader. Now, this high-tech cheese tracking may seem a bit excessive to some, but remember, there's a lot at stake. And by lots, we mean billions of dollars. The pride of Parma and Reggio Emilia is also on the line. So the Parmesan cheesemakers are doing everything to ensure that the counterfeits are toast.
It's been 3 weeks since a coup unfolded in Niger. Its president was toppled and arrested, the army took over, the people cheered them on, and now the junta is ruling the nation. It all happened so quickly that West Africa was left aghast. But now they want to swoop in to save the day, aka reverse the coup. On Thursday, West African army chiefs met in Ghana. They discussed a possible military intervention in Niger. They say they prefer diplomacy, but if all else fails, they're ready to intervene militarily.
Let no one be in doubt that if everything else fails, the valiant forces of West Africa, both the military and the civilian components, are ready to answer to the call of duty. By all means available, constitutional order will be restored in the country. And this meeting today bears testimony to that.
Basically, the West African bloc is ready for war. It is also known as ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. The ECOWAS has sent troops in multiple nations before, so this will not be their first time. But this time, they are a little wary. There are a few reasons for that. The first is mobilizing the force. It has been done in the past, but there is no clear parameter yet. Gathering an army depends on the will of the members. The ECOWAS has 15 members. 3 of them have been suspended. The remaining 12 are willing to send troops. But they face some opposition at home, which brings us to the second problem, the second challenge, the number of troops. Any operation this big will need a lot of troops. It will also take weeks to pull together. But most ECOWAS members are under-equipped. They're also impatient. Plus, they don't want to get caught in a drawn-out conflict. The third problem is Niger's coup leader, General Abdurrahmane Tiani. He has worked for the ECOWAS before. Tiani served as a battalion commander for ECOWAS peacekeepers, so he knows what an ECOWAS military intervention would look like. Chances are he will be prepared for it. And challenge number 4, this could destabilize the region. Any attack on Niger will destabilize the entire region. Let me pull up a map for you. The area highlighted is the Sahel region. It stretches from Senegal on the Atlantic coast to Eritrea on the Red Sea coast. Niger is located here. Now, the Sahel is not a very stable region to begin with. There are famines, terrorism, rebellions and human trafficking. Plus, there's drugs and arms trade. So, if a war breaks out, all hell breaks loose. There will be civilian casualties, hundreds of them. People will escape to the bordering states. There will be a huge influx of refugees and terror groups will take advantage, so terrorism will grow in the region. In short, the Sahel region will become more unstable. And this will spill over to the rest of Africa. So military intervention can have stark consequences. What are the other options? Well, the first one is a special forces operation. Basically, they won't send a full-fledged army, but a smaller force. They could also ask the US and French forces in Niger to help. Another option is aiding a counter-coup. Mohamed Bazoum won the 2021 election with 56% of the vote, so he may have some support left. Plus, there are divisions in the military too. They may not all be united behind the coup. Regional powers could exploit that. If nothing works, there's always sanctions. ECOWAS has taken a strong stance against Niger. They can still continue with the sanctions and call for a return to civilian rule. The junta says it is willing to discuss that, but they haven't mentioned any time frame. So the big question now is, what will ECOWAS do? Will they go to war or will they talk to the junta?
You will put in place a plan to ensure that the standby force is activated and that democracy will be restored in Niger. If presidential guards in Guinea and Niger, I'll use the word, take hostage their president, nobody, and let me repeat, nobody in West Africa is safe.
When the coup happened, ECOWAS had set a deadline for the junta, surrender or we will make you. That deadline is long past. Now, if they do not go in, it will hurt their credibility. They have drawn a red line. They will have to find the political will and the means to honor it. Our goal on this show is pretty clear and simple too. Give you the news, context and analysis. We try not to become the news ourselves, but sometimes we just can't help it. Today is one of those days. The Economist has published an article on Indian media's coverage of diplomacy, and it mentions me by name. It also talks about our network. But unlike The Economist, we won't get personal. We'll stick to facts and arguments. Now, credit where it's due, the article gets one thing right, just one. It says Indians and the Indian media have become more interested in foreign affairs. Whether it's the war in Ukraine or the coup in Niger or the mass shootings in America, we're more interested. And you would think that's a good thing. But The Economist disagrees. Listen to what they've said. The new media focus on India's role in the world tends to be hyper-partisan, nationalistic, and often stunningly ill-informed. Do you know what's stunning? The level of Western arrogance on display here. Here's what The Economist is basically saying. Indian media is covering foreign affairs, but they don't know anything about it. It's an insult wrapped up as analysis. Reminds me of British colonial officers. You may remember their argument from the textbooks. It's not that you don't deserve self-rule, it's that you're not capable of it. This Economist article is the 21st century update on that. You cover foreign policy, but you don't know it. That's what they're saying. So who does? Certainly not The Economist. This is the same agency that defended the invasion of Iraq. Look at their headline, The Case for War. In 2002, The Economist said its readers have two options. Let me quote. To give up and give in, or to remove Saddam Hussein before he gets his bomb. Painful as it is, our vote is for war. Now, I agree that Indian media has several problems. But guess what we have never done? Voted for war. Is this the stunning expert analysis that India lacks? Around 200,000 civilians died after the US invasion of Iraq. 0 weapons of mass destruction were found. Was that not ill-informed? And it wasn't just The Economist. All the so-called leading papers got it wrong, like the New York Times and the Washington Post. They supported the war in Iraq. I have another example for you. China. In 1999, China joined the World Trade Organization. The Economist was thrilled. Listen to what they said. WTO membership requires a strengthened rule of law so an emboldened judiciary might one day be able to challenge party decisions. I wish I had one of those reality show buzzers, because The Economist could not have been more wrong. No court has been able to challenge the Communist Party in China. But there's more. China's membership of the WTO has the potential to change the dynamics of a political system that looks out of date. Absolutely. The dynamic has changed. Just one problem though. It has changed for the worse. China is now ruled by its most authoritarian leader since Mao Zedong. I could go on, but you get the point. The Economist has got plenty wrong. It was wrong about Google. It was wrong about digital music. It was wrong about the 2008 financial crisis. It was also wrong about the Eurozone crisis. Yet they call the Indian media stunningly ill-informed. I must say, full marks for audacity. It takes a special skill to be wrong so many times and still criticize others. The Economist should probably publish an article with all their mistakes. And spoiler alert, they have. It's called To Err is Human. Let's come back to the article though, the one they've published now. Towards the end, The Economist has some advice for the government of India. Rein in your media, that's what they're saying. If not, it will affect India's relations with the West. So much for the freedom of press. This article sort of disproves the point it makes. Yes, we have defended India's position on Ukraine, also on Pakistan and on China, but it's not because of partisanship. It's because the policy makes sense. Defending India is not the same as defending a party or a government. If only The Economist had done some research. India's opposition and government are on the same page when it comes to Ukraine. They back the same policy. And let's be clear, this is not about hyper-nationalism or partisanship or anything else. It's about arrogance. Western media can criticize India all they want to. When they do it, it's freedom of press. But when Indian media criticizes the West, it is ill-informed. If this isn't arrogance, what is? The Economist says, we taunted Europe by calling them weak and dependent on America. Should we apologize for quoting the President of France? Because Emmanuel Macron said, Europe should not become America's vassal. And what does vassal mean? A subordinate to someone else. The thing is, India doesn't need lectures on diplomacy from The Economist. We have 3rd century manuscripts on military strategy and foreign affairs. 3rd century. People in the US were figuring out agriculture back then. So the interest may be new, but our worldview and ideas are not. And now let's move on from antiquated outlooks to something actually ancient, dinosaurs, or rather their parents. Some scientists in Brazil have found the ancestors of the giant lizards, and it may not be as formidable as you think. Last year, a complete fossil of the dinosaur's predecessor was found. It was a 1 meter long skeleton, quite tiny compared to its eventual offspring. But the fossilized little rabbit reptile, that's what the scientific name means, has given us some big clues about how dinosaurs evolved. It also helps solve some mysteries about the giants that once roamed the earth. Here's a report.
Say hello to the Venturoraptor gesane. This 1 meter long tree lizard roamed the earth about 230 million years ago. The images you're seeing are scientific recreations made possible after the discovery of some fossils last year. The fossils were found in Brazil, and they were some of the most complete remains of the Venturoraptor gesane ever discovered. The creature was part of a species we know very little about. They're called lagopetids. That means rabbit reptiles. To find one of their fossils intact was a breakthrough.
The point is that we know very little about the lagopetids. This animal with this new discovery also allows us for the first time to have an idea on how these animals looked like. For the first time, we know how the faces of these creatures look like.
That was one of the Brazilian scientists who discovered the fossil. It was found in southern Brazil last year, and it was a novel discovery. While humans have found numerous dinosaur fossils, we haven't really dug up too many of these creatures, mostly because they're small and delicate compared to gigantic dinosaur skeletons. And there's a reason for that. These creatures are a sort of missing link, a precursor to two types of dinosaurs, the land lizards and the flying ones, dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Pterosaur isn't exactly a common name, but anyone who's seen any dinosaur movie knows them. Giant flying reptiles like the pterodactyl. That species is technically separate from dinosaurs, no matter what the Jurassic Park movies may tell you. These winged lizards are the earliest known vertebrates to take to the skies, the first known creatures with a spine that could actually take off and land. Pterosaurs have always been a bit of a mystery, because it was hard to understand how gigantic lizards learned to fly. Well, the newly discovered Venturoraptor gesane fossil has helped answer some of these questions.
By gathering all of this new information on this animal's anatomy, for the first time we can see the precursors of the pterosaurs in a very clear way. That by itself is a very important discovery. So we observed that the degree and morphological variation of these precursors of the dinosaurs and pterosaurs was much greater than we had imagined.
That's a technical explanation. The full version has been published in the journal Nature. But here's a simpler version. The researchers say land dinosaurs and flying ones started separating much earlier than expected, and the Brazilian fossil was from an ancestor of the flying pterosaurs. It was small, light, with a hooked mouth and long limbs. The scientists believe this helped the Venturoraptor gesane climb trees. They think the rabbit reptiles would live on branches and hop from treetop to treetop. Their long limbs eventually, over millions of years, evolved into scaly reptilian wings. And that's how the flying pterosaur creatures came into existence. It was a long process that began millions of years ago. It's another reason why dinosaurs and pterosaurs should not be mixed up. This is a simplistic version of the discovery, and there's much more research to be done. But it's one more giant dinosaur-sized step towards understanding our planet better.
After talking about dinosaurs, let's talk about the fate they all met with, death. That's what our next story is about. Slightly morose for a Friday, I know. But it's a grave affair worth talking about. Philosophers have long pondered it. So have physicians. Ancient civilizations were obsessed with death. How did they perceive death? Ancient Egyptians believed dying was the most significant thing one could do in their life. But in Mesopotamia, they called death a wage of sin. For them, death was dark stuff. What about the ancient Chinese? They believed death was a prolongation of life. If I were to explain it to Gen Z, kind of like how Facebook accounts live forever. Well, wait, Facebook is ancient too. I mean Instagram, that's the app definition of modern. Speaking of which, how would the modern world define death? In today's day and age, death often means a forever life in the digital realm. Our videos float on the internet whether or not we walk the earth. Our angry comments on YouTube exist forever whether or not we like them. Death imitates life, so it only makes sense that now death itself is going digital. Many people in China would agree. You see, they're now resting in tech. Once people die, their ashes are stored in a compartment of a large room, kind of like inside a safe of a bank. All the walls are covered with electronic screens which display pictures of the deceased or the things they love. It sounds absurd, but people say it personalizes cremation. But that isn't the main goal behind this. The real aim is twofold. One is to save land, which would otherwise be used for burials. Beijing wants to reduce the land occupied by cemeteries by 70% till 2035. So the government is all for digital burials. The second aim is to make the process more affordable. Now, China leads the world in funeral service demand. In 2020, its market was worth $35 billion. It is predicted to reach $56 billion by 2026. What can we say? Death is a real money maker. It is taking a toll on people's pockets. An average funeral in China costs about 45% of a person's annual salary. The global average is 10%. People even take a graveyard loan to fund funerals. So digital cemeteries are unconventional, even bizarre, but they are affordable. Just this year, at least 500 such digital plots have been sold in China. In fact, people across the world seem to be interested in them because funerals are not expensive just in China. In Japan, they cost more than 68% of an average person's annual salary, 68%. In Germany, 16%. In South Africa, 13%. In the UK and the US, about 12%. Sure, they're not expensive everywhere. In India, for instance, they cost only 2% of a person's average annual salary. In Russia, 1%. So digital funerals may not make sense in all countries, but in some, they have birthed the industry for death. So-called death startups are dying to get into the business. No, their employees do not go around murdering people. The world has enough freelancers doing that. These startups operate in the arena of death. Some services hold online memorials for the deceased. Others curate an online mausoleum, basically a digital twin of physical burials, where clients can get buried on virtual islands of their choice, even choose its weather conditions perhaps. Basically, if you live in a hot city but hate it, maybe in death you can enjoy a cool breeze and sip pumpkin latte. Other startups are also creating AI replicas of the dead, which mimic a person's voice and likeness and help someone live forever in digital form. But death startups are not just for the afterlife. A UK-based startup helps people with insurance and digital legal documents to ease the post-death paperwork. At least in death, one should get respite from that paperwork. Another startup helps people write their will. A Netherlands-based startup offers another kind of service. It helps cancel subscriptions and accounts of a deceased person. Now I understand how all of this must sound. On the one hand, these services sound helpful. If that's a stretch, maybe remotely interesting. But for most people, these startups seem to be mocking death. After all, death can be a traumatic experience for most, not just for the deceased, but also for their families. It is traumatic, it is emotionally taxing. And the cyber death industry knows this. It battles this challenge regularly. But here's the thing. Trends say that the younger generation cares more about practicality than customs. Many don't care about being one with the soil after death or about the feng shui of their burial ground. To them, digital death eases the pain of mixing grief with paperwork. It helps them talk to a loved one they have lost. It stops them from spending a bomb on funerals. Perceptions around death are changing. And in this, we are offered a reminder. No matter the definition of death, it varies across cultures and changes with time. At the end of the day, the end of anyone's life is simply defined by how they view it. So what appears dystopian today could be the future of death. Even if that means a picture of BTS or Shah Rukh Khan on a burial collage, digital death is strange, but it could help lift your spirits. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Space Research Organization has released images of the moon captured by the Vikram lander. It is the last leg of its journey to the moon. The touchdown is expected on the 23rd of August. In Malaysia, a private plane came crashing down. 10 people have been killed, including all on board. But it's not all grim news. Here's something to cheer you up. In Bolivia, puppies donned a dapper look to receive blessings at a church. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1920, the US Congress ratified an amendment that granted women the right to vote. This milestone was achieved after decades of struggle and protests. With that, we call it a wrap. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. We'll see you tomorrow.
Sí, lo quiero ceder, pero si le suelto el traste se va. Los animales. Quiero dar gracias a Dios.